Hello, everybody. How are you? I'm Ibrahim Sundiata, Emeritus Professor at Brandeis University. I'm coming to you from lovely Salvador, Brazil. And I thought I would share some thoughts with you today. About 2 years ago, before COVID, I went online on Facebook and chatted to about 30 people and said, "Oh, I have lots to say. I'll be back." Now, after various adventures in Brazil and back in the US of A and back here again, I want to pick off where I left off. There are a number of things I want to talk about. One is Brazil. The other one is about Brothers and Strangers, a book I wrote about Liberia and the Black Diaspora, which I've been asked to translate into Spanish. That's going to be a lot of work if I do it. And this is the 20th anniversary. And besides that, this is more or less, I don't know what anniversary it is, of my coming back to Brazil. Because Brazil is actually where I started to study the Black diaspora. I started out a long time ago in the 1970s as a student, as an Africanist in Ghana. And then I've been back to Ghana various times, and I'm going back this summer, God willing, in August. But it was in Brazil that I first began to get an interest in people of African descent outside Africa. So I came here way back in the 1980s with a Fulbright grant and was at the Federal University of Bahia, in Bahia, Brazil, of which Salvador is the capital. And I did this through the good auspices of my friend, Michael Turner, who is unfortunately not with me and not with us anymore. He was a great raconteur, a great facilitator, today what we call an influencer, and he knew a lot about a lot of things. And many years ago, he and I studied Arabic at NYU, and that's how I met him, studying Arabic. And then after the class was over, we got our grades. His grade was better than mine, but we both passed the class. And then for many, many years, Michael was off the radar. And then one year at a conference of Africanists and people who deal with the diaspora, Michael turned up. And we all said, about three of us standing in a row, said, "Michael, where have you been? You've disappeared. We don't see you anywhere." And he said, "No, I've been in Brazil." And I gave up Arabic, and I gave up West African languages, and I've learned Portuguese, and now I'm teaching in Brasilia. And you all have to come and visit me. And so that was actually my link up with Brazil many years ago. Then I got a grant to come here to teach in English, to teach African history. And after that, I started coming here about every 2 years. So every other year. And then finally I retired. And after retirement, I decided to come to Brazil as much as possible. And now, God willing, I hope to retire to Brazil. So some of you ask me, why are you always in Brazil now? And I'm saying, well, this is where I plan to be. It's a place I like. So people would say, well, what do you like about it? I'd say, well, a lot of things. One is the history. Brazil has a long history with Angola and Central Africa. It also has some connection with West Africa, the area I worked on. And so because there is this kind of affinity with things African, I've come. At the same time, and there might be a question on this later, Brazil is not Africa. I often meet people, in fact, on this trip, I met someone who's very Afrocentric. And I said, you're here, and I've seen you here 4 or 5 years. And he said, yes, I love Brazil. Brazil is my African home. And I said, yes, but there's Africa. There is Africa. And he said, oh, but I don't want to go there. So, I think that opens up a whole series of questions of what Africanity is. I'm saying you can get on a plane and you can go to Africa. It's a real place with real people, with real food, with real dancing. I go both places. This year I will be both places, and I have an interest in both. So I was interested in his response. The other thing is, what is the influence of Brazil? What is the influence of Africa on Brazil? And here I think we can get into some very interesting questions, which might, I think, to an African American be slightly off-putting, embarrassing, funny, weird. Years ago, and this deals with culture. Years ago, I went to a meeting at the Museum of Fine Arts in Salvador. And there was a very famous Brazilian anthropologist, sort of the father of modern Brazilian anthropology, Gilberto Freire. And he was giving a lecture on things Afro-Brazilian. And so I thought I should go. So I went. And when I went in, I became conscious of something. This Afro-Brazilian lecture had almost no Black people in attendance, except those people who were serving the food, which was Afro-Baiano, or Afro-Salvadoreño, Afro-Brazilian. So I sat down and listened to the lecture. And the lecture was what Africa has given to Brazil. So I sat there, and the first thing that he said was Africa had given Brazil rhythm and music. And he talked about samba, he talked about rhythms, he talked about the movements of rhythms across the South Atlantic. He talked about the mixture of rhythms between Africa and Iberia. He talked about indigenous influences in terms of instruments. And, this is pretty much what I thought. And then the next thing he said, because this is a very serious lecture in the Museum of Fine Arts, and I'm all dressed up, not like I am today. And he said, the next thing Africa has given Brazil. What's the next thing? Sex. So I'm sitting there in my suit and I say, well, this is not something I would expect in an American lecture. It simply would not be there. This is not, it's a serious topic, but then it's really dealing usually with mental illness or pornography, and here it's dealing with culture. So at this point, Gilberto Freire was in his 80s, and he got very exuberant, if I can use that word. And he said, oh yes, the exuberance of African sexuality inflects and infuses every aspect of Brazilian life. And then he stops, and I thought, okay, he stopped, because I don't know where this is going. The last thing, dear listener, he mentioned, because I'm sitting there now a little uncomfortable, he said, the last thing Africa has given us is, he used the word cookery. Today, we probably would say in American English, or cuisine. And so he said, well, if you look at Bahia and you look at the cuisine of northeast of Brazil, it's heavily African. Food, preparation, and I thought, okay. And I liked some Brazilian cuisine a lot. And others I don't like at all. And so I'm not a very good culture vulture, because I eat something, I'll go, someone will say, well, this is the most authentic thing you can eat. And I will go, well, good. But I'm not feeling it. Now, before I run out of time, let me just say one thing, because it fits in here. 3 months ago, before I left the United States, I was called to be on a panel. And I think the panel says a lot about how we perceive culture, how we interpret culture, and how we own culture. Some of you who know me know I have a great fault. I don't cook. And I was called by Harvard to be on a panel about diaspora cooking. So first I said, well, you got the wrong, I really said this, you got the wrong person. I don't cook. And then the answer was, well, we don't want someone who cooks. We want someone who's traveled. And I said, yeah, I've traveled, but I'm not an expert on, let's say, Ghanaian cuisine of its various types, or Brazilian cuisine of its various types, or cuisine in the American South on its various types. And then the answer came from a friend of mine, I want you on this panel. So, and it could have been that I thought I knew something, or it could have been vanity. I said, okay. So I go into this room in African Studies at Harvard, and I sit down among some very learned people. I mean, these were learned people about some food. And the day before, they had showed the movie High on the Hog, which was about African American cuisine. And they were saying African American cuisine has this African base that goes back to West Africa. And I listened, and I heard about tomatoes, and I heard about various cultigens that are used in African American food. And so then it ended, and there were two people on the panel on either side of me. One had a restaurant in London where they did a kind of nouvelle African cuisine. And then there was a brother on the other side who owned a restaurant somewhere, and he did basic black cuisine. There was nothing extraneous. It was all black, wherever. And then there was a woman who owned a chain of restaurants, and she was talking about the money to get the restaurant business going. So when I spoke, I actually used, having tried to memorize, I memorized all the things that Gilberto Freire had said were African, were particularly Brazilian about Brazilian cooking. And most of the stuff that I was reading, because I read it before, but I reread it, was a mixture. There was a lot of stuff made with corn, which is Native American. And I thought, as I kept saying, well, I love acarajé, I love this, but a lot of it was based on corn, maize. And I thought, well, that's not African. And I sort of said that in a soft voice. Then I sort of said, and a lot of it has pepper, which is indigenous to South America, but there's also quiabo, which is okra, which is West African, and there are various kinds of guinea fowl, which are West African. So I ended up basically saying that this was a wonderful melding out of most horrible circumstances of African food coming to the Americans and being influenced by European culture, but also very much in terms of cultigens, by indigenous plants and ways of preparing the food. Now, not to go on too long, let me say this. I have a problem in Brazil, which I call the Diaspora problem. And I think food says a lot about this. It's a very tiny thing, but I think this is the key of a lot of things we can learn. When I go to a restaurant in Brazil, people often look at me as a snob. And the thing is that growing up, I like pepper in my food. Not Brazilian pepper, but North Americans call pepper, black pepper. So now for a number of years, I'll go in a restaurant and I'll say, may I have pepper? And the people would say, okay, pimenta. They always give me pepper that would be used in paella. And I'm saying, no. I want pimenta do reino, which I feel embarrassed by saying, which literally is pepper from the kingdom, meaning from Iberia someplace, which actually turns out to be Indian pepper from the Malabar coast. And I'll make a joke. It's not black food if it doesn't have black pepper. Sometimes people get the joke, and sometimes people think I am weird. I'm saying, get me some Portuguese-based pepper so that I can have black food and a black site. But to me, what's fascinating about this is how words move, food moves, culture moves, and that how, in a way, by making mistakes, I've learned a lot. I have learned just as much from my mistakes as I've learned from combining knowledge and speaking what I think is truth to power. And now I would like for my very able assistant and editor, Pedro Henrique, to ask me some questions, if he would.
Some questions about Brazil. First, I would like to know why have you chosen Brazil? Why?
Okay, now, I mean, like,
Yeah, no, I know.
you know. Okay, I thought about before. I've always wanted to come to Brazil ever since my first time. So the question for me has always been, what part of Brazil? Should I go to Rio, or should I be in Sao Paulo, which is very big? Everyone says, well, Sao Paulo is bigger, and in terms of culture, it doesn't have the Afro-Brazilian culture, but just it has enough Afro-Brazilian people to make up for the difference. And since Salvador was the first place I came, it is the place that I thought I would remain, because it had all those elements. It's not a small city. It's much bigger than the city I live in, Boston, which is very small by comparison. Boston has less than 1 million people. And I know many people here. I have, in terms of Brazilian friends, I probably have about 50 people that I can call upon, people I can visit with. And also, and I can be frank, I guess, I'm interested in the construction of race. So I once wrote an article in Brazil, and it published in the United States as well, about the construction of race, how Americans construct race, how they use race, talk about race, and how Brazilians construct race or don't construct race and don't talk about it. And I find that there's no better place to do that than in Salvador. Yeah.
What is it that you like the most about Brazil?
The thing I like the most about Brazil, and this is going to sound sort of hackneyed, is its diversity. And I think that there is a lot. The U.S. is diverse, but in a different way. And I think Brazil is diverse because of different kinds of people and the different kinds of, obviously, architecture. Brazil is bigger than the U.S. without Alaska. So if you take away Alaska, this country is bigger. And it also has all of these influences coming in, like, people still asking, what is a Brazilian, and how do Brazilians compare to the U.S.? There's always that comparison, which I think sometimes is very unfair. Not to get political, but sometimes people compare the ex-president of Brazil with the ex-president of the U.S. And I might say, if I were political, which I'm not, they're both equally bad.
The next question. What other regions of Brazil do you know besides Salvador and Bahia? Where else in Brazil have you been?
I've been to, I've been to Manaus. I mean, to talk of places really far away. I've been to Manaus. I've been to Piauí in the last year. I've been to Sao Paulo with some frequency, but it's not a place I would live. I've been to Rio a lot, where I thought I would live. And like I say, comparing all the places I've been, I think that this is the place. It sounds hackneyed, but I feel most at home in Brazil. And there's something about it where, just knowing people, I think it's more the people than the place, that I know a lot of people here. And I know more people here now than I do in Boston, where I moved to work. And so, having lived in the United States and moved around, I ended up in Boston, which was a nice place to live and work. But it's not where I really grew up. I want to say goodbye to you, my friends, and also say goodbye to Pedro Henrique, who's been my very able and competent assistant going forward. I thank him. And also want to say that this viewing will be available on my Facebook page and also on YouTube and Spotify. Thank you so much. And thank you again, Pedro.